I have a question for you all. It's by a show of hands. I want to know favorite hot dog brands. Okay? I know, Easter, this is how you thought it would start. Let's talk about hot dogs. Hebrew National, zero respect. Put some respect on the name of Hebrew National. They're really good. Nathan's hot dogs. All right. Oscar Mayer Wiener. Is it because of the song? Is it because of the song in the truck and the little whistle? I get it. Branding works. Ballpark Franks. All right, we got a few here. Bar S. Yeah. We got one in. Yes. I want you to know that, like, I kind of love hot dogs. Basically, I love any food that's kind of bad for me, to be honest. I don't know what that is, but I grew up, and there was a time in my life in college where I couldn't trust most of the foods at the cafeteria, but the hot dog was tried and true and faithful. It was always the same. It didn't change. The cooks couldn't mess it up. So I had one like every single day. Just a little bit of mustard, no ketchup. I'm not from Chicago, but I respect it. I get where they're coming from, all right? But when I grew up, we had stuff all the time. You chop those puppies up, put them in Kraft mac and cheese, you got a whole meal. You're done, set. Come on. And how much better can it get? And I grew up, what people would call struggle meals today, I hold as a delicacy. And I'm going to talk you through how you make it. You get out a hot dog, probably Oscar Mayer Wiener at the time. I don't think the Midwest had discovered Nathan's or Hebrew National or all beef. That was too much for us. And so you take it out, you get a fork, and you stab it 150 times with a fork. Like you just stab it. You roll it up with a napkin or a paper towel, pop that puppy in the microwave, hit add 30 seconds, and it's going to come out, and I know what you're thinking. That's too much time, and you're correct. The ends were always a little bit too crisp, and you didn't understand how it got that crispy, but you didn't really care. You just got past it. And then what you did is you took that hot dog out, and then you pulled off of the top of your refrigerator the most economical piece of white bread you could get. You pull that out, you slap a hot dog in the middle of it, fold it in half. And that was a delicacy for me growing up. That was like, I'm after school, I'm hungry, I got this. I can press play on a microwave. Oh wait, it's not called play. And because I've enjoyed it so much, because I enjoyed hot dogs, I've tried introducing Thomas, my oldest, to hot dogs, but he is our picky eater and could not care less. We've tried cutting them like octopuses. We've tried everything. It doesn't work. But Peter, however, he is all about them. This week, I had to go on a special run to Dairy Queen to get one. And he'll sit there and he'll go, hot dog, this good. See, I've shown my kids this delicacy, and one of the things that hit me this week is there's a mystery about hot dogs. I don't know how they're made, and I don't know what's in them, and I don't want to know. I know what you're thinking. There's someone here who is the person who knows it all, and they're going to come up to me after service, and they're going to show me a video on YouTube and be like, this is how they're made. If I run away from you, just know I'm still being hospitable and loving, but you've heard, I don't want to know. And here's what happens. I recognize I have no idea how they're made. I don't know what animal it is, if it even is animal at all. And I don't want to know how they're made. And I don't want you to tell me the truth about how they're made. I want to keep living thinking that they're the most nutritious, the highest in delicacy that I could ever have. Don't tell me the truth about what's in a hot dog, because I like what I think about a hot dog. See, I think that that's how a lot of people are with God. They have an image in their head, they have an idea in their head about who God is. Something that they got from a friend, a neighbor, a TV show, a Reddit post, somewhere, and now that's who God is. And so they're walking around with that assumption, and they're going, don't change my truth. This is who God is to me. Don't you dare change it. And so to begin today, I want to ask you all a question, and I don't care if you've been a Christian for 70 years or if you've been a Christian for 7 seconds. I want you to actually think about this question. Would you want to know the truth about God, even if it's completely different from what you currently believe? Even if it goes against everything I was raised with, even if I grew up in a Christian church and the truth was different than what I believe. Would you just want to know the truth about God? Or do you want to keep on believing what you believe because you're comfortable there, because you like it? Our sermon series today is called Do You Believe This? Our sermon is going to be pulled out of John chapter 11. The scriptures will be on the screen, so you don't have to go and thumb through. If you want to, feel free. But we're going to go on to the Easter story. But what I want you to know is I think there's many people who can give lip service to what it is that they believe, but that's only surface deep. And it hasn't gotten down into their bones. It hasn't gotten down into their blood. What they believe about God resides in theory alone. C.K. Chesterton, he's an author. If you've ever watched, what is his name? Father Brown, TV show Detective, that's written by G.K. Chesterton. He was an author and theologian from Europe, UK. And he has this quote: "The Christian ideal has not been tried and found wanting. It has been found difficult and left untried." So I want to wrestle with that today. Today our story revolves around 4 people. You have Jesus, Martha, Mary, and Lazarus. I have a question for you all. What is Lazarus famous for? Dying and coming back. This is a quick aside. I think it's really interesting that in the chapter of John 11, where we're at today, over and over and over again, he's described as the friend of Jesus, the friend of Jesus, the friend of Jesus, but we all know him as the guy who died. And I think it's also interesting that it's quite possible that he had tasted heaven. He had been dead for 3 days. And then he's like, "Nah, you got to come back, though." That's kind of an interesting dynamic in this story that doesn't get talked about a lot. That's just a side of my brain thinking. So we're going to keep moving, though, to the stuff that I actually have written down, because it's a lot. No spoilers. So he's known for being raised from the dead. And here's how the story begins in John chapter 11. Jesus is doing Jesus things. He and his disciples are going around. He's healing people. He's turning bread and fish into more bread and fish. He's doing Jesus things. And then his disciples come and tell him, "Hey, your friend Lazarus has gotten sick." And Jesus goes, "Yeah, I know he has, but it won't lead to death." And they're like, "Okay." Some time passes. We don't know how much, but time passes in this story. And then what ends up happening is someone comes and Jesus has a revelation, and he tells his disciples, he says, "Lazarus has fallen asleep." And his disciples go, "Yeah, of course he has. He's sick. He needs some rest." And he goes, "No, Lazarus has died. We must go." And so Jesus is on his way to visit Lazarus' house. He's on his way there, and time has passed. He delayed going on purpose. Why? Because he said, this sickness will not lead to death. It is for God's glory that it happens. Now, if you have a picture in your head that Jesus is love or God is love, which he is, but it's a Hallmark Valentine's type of love, what you're not going to understand is how in the world Jesus let someone die for his glory. And I paused on purpose there because earlier I asked you, are you okay with the truth about who God is being different than the one you hold? And I want you to think through the fact that Jesus and God could have saved Lazarus from death and all of his family and his town from grieving him. And yet what did they do? God and the Trinity said, "Hold." Are we okay with that? Moving on. What's interesting is this story, Martha can't wait for Jesus to get there. She runs out of town, and she goes to where Jesus is, and she goes like this in John 11:21. He says this, She says, Lord, said to Jesus, if you had been there, my brother would not have died. But I know that even God will give you whatever you ask. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. And Martha answered, I know. He will rise again in the resurrection at the last day. Martha had come beseeching Jesus. She has had the knowledge about who he was. She had some limited understanding of who Jesus is. And then Jesus says to her, your brother will rise again. And if you read what Martha's response is in a certain way, there's different ways that you could read that, but what I would say is she's going, yeah, I know. He's going to rise again in the future. I'm going to see him in heaven, but he's still dead. You could have stopped this, Jesus. Jesus here is trying to comfort Martha, to let her in on what God is about to do with their limited perspective, with her limited belief that wouldn't allow them to see what God was actually doing. So the question is, do you believe this? Do you have the faith like Martha did to say what she said there? Do you have the faith to respond to Jesus and just say, I know who you are, that you can get me through this? And are you okay with having enough faith for having some mystery and not knowing the why in the middle of it? Last week, Harrison was preaching, and he made a comment about us keeping God at arm's length and how that's about 2.5, 3 feet from us. And how many of us who are just fine, not challenging, he didn't say the hot part, not challenging what's in a hot dog. That's what we're doing when we're doing that. When we're keeping God away, we say, you stay out there. We're going to let you on the edges of our life. We're not going to let you in. What ends up happening is you aren't leaning into what the real truth is because it's your own imagination and it's not what God wants. We know this in our real life. We know that we can't get to know someone at arm's length. We can't get to know someone at a distance. And they can't have an impact on us at arm's length and arm's distance. Because if we want to know someone, really get to know someone, specifically maybe in a husband and wife type of relationship, eventually you're going to have to let the walls down and you're going to have to let them into the place where no one else is tread. And it's the same thing with Jesus. If you really want to get to know him and him to really get to know you, you're going to have to let him in. And so, the question I have today is if you believe this, it changes everything. But if nothing has changed, what do you believe? If you believe this about who Jesus is, it changes everything. But if nothing has changed, what do you believe? Martha goes on in verse 24. We're going to echo 24, and then we're going to see Jesus' response. She says, Martha answered, I know he will rise again in the resurrection and in the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? Martha says, yes, Lord, she replied. I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who has come into the world. Do you believe this? We sit here today. I stand here, admittedly, 2,000 years later, and the question still rings out. Do you believe this? Do you actually believe that there was a human who walked the earth that was fully God and fully human at the same time? Do you believe that there was a human who walked on this planet, who helped create the planet, that he was the means by which it was created? Do you believe that there was a tomb that was filled with the body of the Son of God that is now empty? Do you believe that there is someone who occupied the grave of Joseph of Arimathea and someone who walked out of it? Do you believe that the stone is rolled away? If you believe this, it changes everything. If nothing has changed, what do you believe? I might need to get the towel out. What I want you guys to know is I was getting ready for the sermon, wrestling with it, and as I was about to walk out of the door one morning, this 2 words came, cognitive dissonance. Say that with me, cognitive dissonance. I want to preface this by I am not a psychologist. I took 1 semester a long time ago. I did okay in that class, but that does not qualify me probably to teach about this. But the internet helps, and so I hopped on almighty YouTube and I looked into cognitive dissonance because I was like, why am I thinking of this? And here's what I think we're dealing with today, that if you believe this, then you would do this. Why is it that there are people who believe that but aren't doing it, aren't following? And so put this graphic up for me. This is a graph of cognitive dissonance. I'm going to try to do this fast because I have a lot to say. Do we believe Jesus is Christ? Yet I don't follow. That's your dissonance. You have belief, you have an idea, but yet your life doesn't live it out. Yet you don't fall in line with that. You act oppositely. The way that this is normally taught is kind of like, I know smoking is bad for me, I still smoke. How is it that people can be okay with that? Right? So that's where we're at. I believe Jesus is Christ. I'm not following him, right? I'm not modeling my life after him. I'm not his apprentice. I'm not his disciple. I'm only lukewarm at best. So I think that there is these reasons. You have these options to resolve the cognitive dissonance. You can change your belief, you can change your action, or you can change the perception of the action. Let me explain. Okay? You can reason away why it is that you aren't following, or you can reason away that the belief isn't that big of a deal. Okay? So you go, yeah, he is, but he loves me, and he loves me just the way I am, so nothing needs to happen here. I don't need to make a response to who Jesus is. I'm good. So you're reasoning it away. Or you can change your action. You can actually become an apprentice, or deconstruct and fall away entirely, right? You can do that. Or change your action perception. Not a big deal. Maybe that's more of the he loves me just the way I am type thought, right? And so those are the three ways that you can resolve your cognitive dissonance. Because today the sermon is, do you believe this? If you believe this, everything changes. If nothing changed, what do you believe? But more aptly, maybe, why isn't it living out? Why isn't the world radically shifted by the 80, 90 people gathered here today? Jesus did it with 12, right? So I'm wanting us to wrestle with this thought. And there's someone in the Bible who actually did that. Paul talks about his cognitive dissonance in Romans chapter 7, verse 15. I do not understand what I do. For what I want to do, I do not do. But what I hate to do, I do. The only way forward is through faith and guidance of the Holy Spirit, that we can move forward with this moment. See, I could stand up here and I could tell you many logical reasons and historical reasons to believe that Jesus actually rose from the dead. I could tell you about theory after theory. There have been books after books after books after books that have been written on the subject of Christ. Gary Habermas's new book on the resurrection, which is part 1 of 2, and that one volume is over 1,000 pages just on the resurrection. Or N.T. Wright's book, Resurrection and the Son of God, which is over 800 pages. Case for Christ by Lee Strobel. The Reason for God by Timothy Keller. They are out there. They are available to you. Amazon exists. The internet exists. Our library exists. Many of those books are in there. Well, some of them. Not many. I've not gotten around to the 1,800 pages between the two books, but what I want you to know is that even with all of the proofs, even with all of the examples, even with all of the impact that Jesus had and in the way that people responded to what Jesus did and the people who saw him raised again and the way that they responded and that the movement that was led by him, that the most written about person in history was a Messiah from a town called Nazareth in the Middle East, and that the person who's had the biggest impact in all history was a peasant's son, and he was a carpenter, and that those who followed after Jesus helped shape the world we live in. That the way that the church exploded in the midst of persecution speaks to the validity of Christ, that even in the midst of turmoil, persecution, in being killed for their beliefs, even in the midst of disagreement and argument, the church has not been overcome, which is what Christ prophesied to Peter at the mouth of, in Caesarea. It's fine, Caesarea Philippi. And even in earth's darkest day, Christ has shown through the church. But even with all of that, matter if you can't get to the place where it moves from here down into your rib cage. It takes faith. Here's why. Gary Habermas, the one who wrote the 1,000-page volume 1, has this quote. You don't say I do to the history. You say I do to whom the history is about. You don't say I do to the looks or their smarts or the I love your jokes. You say I do to the person. That's where we're at today. I can sit here and give you the example after example. I can give you argument after argument. And if you're interested in doing that, come and see me. We'll walk through it together because I love that stuff. But what I want you to know is all of that stuff, all of the apologetics in the world can't make it into your heart. It can deepen it, but it takes faith because it only comes through the Holy Spirit moving. And if we are experiencing cognitive dissonance today because we sit here and we see that Jesus is the Messiah, and yet we walk out the door and deny him by our lifestyle, then we need to work through our cognitive dissonance just better and get these things to align. See, earlier I asked you if you would want to know the real truth about God, even if it was completely different. And if we do believe that Jesus is the resurrection and the life, if we do believe that he died and on the third day rose and that in him death has been defeated, then that demands a response. These are the kind of statements that if we hold them as true, then it means other things are true. I'm going to say that again because I don't know that it made it through my head and out of my mouth. If we believe that the cross is empty, just like the grave is, if we believe that Jesus is in heaven, if we can testify to those things, then that means there's a litany of other things that are true because he said them and taught them, and that makes him have authority. You tracking with me? Does that make sense? Like, it's one thing for me to stand here and say these things. I'm just a kid. But it's another thing for the creator of the universe to say them and to say, this is how it ought be. And for us to go, yeah, take it and leave it. I'm good over here. It means that these things are true. If Jesus is the Christ, the Messiah, then that means that the prophecies of the Old Testament are true. That a new kingdom, a new kind of kingdom has come, and that it is sealed on the right hand of the throne of heaven. It means that Jesus' name is above every other name. If Jesus defeated death, then we have victory. If Jesus has defeated death, then what shall we fear? If Jesus rose from the dead, then these things he taught hold the utmost importance. If Jesus is God in flesh, then what he has revealed, let me say that slow again. If Jesus is God in flesh, then who he was reveals who God is to us in a person, and therefore we can know him. If Jesus died on our behalf and for all, then we as his followers and fellow believers have the best news that needs to be shared. If Jesus is how humans are supposed to live, then we are to be changing our lives into how he looks. The evidence demands a response. If you believe this, it changes everything. If nothing has changed, what do you believe? James has something to say about this. This is it's not 1820. This is an often debated passage because people think that James is saying, my works earn me heaven. That is false. That is false. That is false. That is not what he is saying here. Here's what James is saying. He says, in the same way, faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by action, is dead. But someone will say, you have faith, I have deeds. Show me your faith without deeds, and I will show you my faith by my deeds. Here's what's happening. James is saying, if you have faith, the real faith in Jesus Christ, no matter what, you will. No matter what, you will respond. No matter what, you will live it out. No matter what, the deeds will overflow. Looking at time. Oftentimes we look at the fruits of the Spirit that are in the book of Galatians, and we think those are things that we need to create in our lives. We need to create patience. We need to create faithfulness. We need to create kindness. We need to create gentleness and self-control. We need to create those things in ourselves. Guess what? It's not the fruits of Aaron. Because my fruits are death, idolatry, sin, darkness, hatred. It's the fruits of the Spirit, which means by faith we are saved, right? It is by grace through faith. I can't get it right. We are saved by faith through grace. We have faith. We have been given grace by God, and His mercy is poured out on us, and therefore we can live and follow after Him. And if we believe that, then we should be walking in it. But what happens is we buy into lie after lie after lie after lie, and then what ends up happening is we cognitive dissonance ourselves into just sitting in a chair. We just cognitive dissonance ourselves into saying, yeah, I know he said that, but. Yeah, I know he said that, but. Yeah, I know he said that, but. And let me tell you, those are some big buts. That wasn't written. John Mark Comer, he's becoming one of my favorite authors. He puts it this way. The problem is, in the West, we have created a cultural milieu where we can be a Christian but not an apprentice. I'm going to read that again because we don't normally say milieu. The problem is, in the West, we have created a cultural milieu where you can be a Christian but not an apprentice. I believe that if you believe in Jesus Christ, it changes everything. And I also believe that if nothing has changed, what do you believe? Because more than likely what has happened is you've created a Jesus and a God that looks a lot like you, which means that you're falling into the first sin of Genesis, which is I can be as God. If you're worshiping anything other than God, anything, even if it's attendance at church, even if it's a preacher who stands up here, even if it's your favorite worship song, even if it's your favorite Bible study, no matter what it is that you worship, if it is not God and God alone, then it is idolatry. I took the air right out of the room. Today, the call is a call to God of heaven, who did not see fit to leave us on our own devices, just spin creation like a top and sit from on high, watching the whole thing fall apart. Instead, being buried and raised again, being death, life, and resurrection, the God Most High, we can say, I do to Jesus. And the beauty of the cross is it's strong enough to carry you. No matter how many times you've walked down the wrong road, no matter how many times you've went, yeah, I believe this, but. No matter how many times you said, I'm going to settle for this, that this is the way I was meant to be, this is who I am. This is part of the trauma that made me who I am. This is part of my DNA. Look, this is how my parents are. I can't change this. That's not what he meant. He didn't want me to change. I don't need to change. There's no reason for me to change. Why would I ever change? I don't need to. No, God, stay away. Okay, stay back, stay back. I don't want you into the dark parts of myself because we think we can hide it from you. We think, hey, I can make it on my own too. Quit asking me to do this. Hey, I can actually do this by myself. I don't need a community to help me walk in this. I don't need a kind of Jesus that says, hey, I want to know you and I want to get into your blood and I want to change you from the inside out because the way that you're living is not the best way of living. The way I lived is the best way to live. I have the best intentions for you. And so therefore give your life to him because he is worthy of your life, because he is worthy of your all. He is worthy of every breath. And he is the air that you breathe and the bread of life, because man does not live on bread alone, but he lives on the word of God. And God is the word, and the word became flesh, and the flesh dwelt among us. And we did not understand it. But then he came, he died, and he rose again on the third day. Do you believe this? If you believe this, it changes everything. Pray with me.